Let me read something to you. It says this from Isaiah 5, "Therefore my people have gone into captivity because they have no knowledge. Their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst." That was verse 13. And in verse 20 it says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Folks, that's where we are in our nation today. We're calling good evil and evil good. One of the things that we're calling good is this thing called Islam. I'm going to be speaking to you largely from the Team V2 report today. And this afternoon, when we come back from lunch, I'll try to answer questions for you on this issue. Sharia law is a very serious threat in America. We are being invaded by a group of people who see it as their absolute imperative to establish a legal system in America which will, in fact, destroy our Constitution to be replaced with this thing called Sharia law. Our Constitution is under a serious threat. We see a lot about the challenges to our Constitution from different legislation and all that is passed, and we question whether health care is legal or whether it's constitutional and so forth. But the reality is there's a greater threat to the Constitution, and that's the encroachment of Sharia law. And that's what this book is all about. Unquestionably, the Muslim Brotherhood, which we've begun to know a lot more about in the last 2.5 months, the Muslim Brotherhood is here in America to destroy that Constitution and to replace it with Sharia law. Now let's just talk just for a moment. And I spoke here about 6 weeks ago on the issues of what's happening in the Middle East. And I would tell you that I don't think there's any question that what we're seeing in the Middle East today was essentially started by the Muslim Brotherhood. And there's overwhelming evidence now that the Muslim Brotherhood was not just an organization that is leveraging or taking advantage of the situation. They started it. In the fall of last year, October-November time frame, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, Mohammed Badi, made a statement that it was time for Muslims in the Middle East to rise up and begin a campaign of jihad against leaders of Muslim countries where Sharia law had not been implemented. People like Hosni Mubarak and President Ali in Tunisia. On the 8th of January, the leading cleric at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, the leading university on Islamic jurisprudence, stood up and made the same request that Muslims begin to rise up in the Middle East, in these countries with Islamic populations, where the Islamic law had not been implemented, rise up against the leadership, overthrow them to establish Sharia law and become part of a global caliphate. And 3 days later, events erupted in Tunisia and then spread over into Egypt and then spread into all these other countries. The Muslim Brotherhood is at the very base of what's going on there. Now, what is the Muslim Brotherhood? I've been speaking about the Muslim Brotherhood for a couple of years. But people sort of thought it was a euphemism for just Muslims in general. No, it's a real organization. And the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928 by two men, Hassan al-Banna and Saeed Khattab. Khattab was actually educated at the University of Northern Colorado. Went back to Cairo, and along with Hassan al-Banna, he created the Muslim Brotherhood. Remember that in 1928, when they created the Muslim Brotherhood, this was only 4 years after the death of the Ottoman Empire. Remember, a man named Ataturk destroyed the Ottoman Empire when he became the president of Turkey, and he said, "We will be a secular government with an Islamic population," and that was the end of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was the great hope of Islam. All their aspirations were in the Muslim Brotherhood. As it went through the Mediterranean, conquering the southern littorals of Europe and all of North Africa, in an effort to establish a Quranic mandated global caliphate. The caliphate is a geographic area, a global community, which would be governed by Sharia law and ultimately would be ruled by the Islamic Messiah or the Mahdi. And depending upon whether you're Sunni or Shia, your beliefs are slightly different in terms of where the Mahdi comes from. But the Ottoman Empire died in 1924. 4 years later, these two men created the Muslim Brotherhood, and their efforts were designed to recreate the Ottoman Empire, which was the great hope of Islam for establishing the global caliphate. They created it in Cairo, Egypt. Their specific objective was to build the caliphate and establish Sharia law, and it has not changed since 1928. Now, in the first 10 years, they only had about 850 members, and a man came along and gave them a lot of money, millions of dollars. And most of you in this audience here know who the man was. It was Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler's game plan was, when he made a deal with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who was the senior Muslim Brotherhood operative in Jerusalem, he made a deal saying, if you will keep these Jews from coming back to Palestine and keep them in Europe, I'll round them up in Europe and exterminate them. Their goal was to destroy all the Jews on the continent of Europe and to keep them out of what we know today as Israel. It was the objective of the Muslim Brotherhood to recreate the Ottoman Empire, establish a global caliphate, implement Sharia law, and destroy their sworn enemy, which is Israel. Okay? They came to America in 1962. They came with the specific intention of destroying America because America stands in the way of the global caliphate, because America is the keepers of the keys of democracy. And you cannot have democracy and Sharia law in a coexistent relationship. The first principle of Sharia law is that there can be no man-made laws. Therefore, you must destroy any concept of man-made laws, or in our case, the democracy under which we live. America was made the target because we were the model to the entire world for freedom of choice, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, for individual civil liberties and freedoms. And if you bring America down, then the rest of the world falls. So America was targeted. The Muslim Brotherhood came here in 1962. Their first organization they started was the Muslim Students Association. They went into our universities, funded by Saudi money. They're still there today with these things called the Muslim Student Associations, and they are funded by millions and millions of dollars of Saudi money, and they're using the Muslim Student Association to influence the next generation of leaders in America. And if you go to a university where they have a strong Muslim Student Association, what you will find is that most of the students in that university have bought the propaganda of the Muslim Brotherhood hook, line, and sinker. They have no clue about the realities and the truth of the Muslim Brotherhood and what they're trying to do in America. And by the way, what's interesting is the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood in America has repeatedly stated what their intentions for America are. There's a man named Abdurrahman al-Moody who was in fact granted free access to the White House of both Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. He was recognized as the most renowned Islamic leader in America. He was sent as a goodwill ambassador repeatedly to the Middle East on behalf of America. And they have a videotape of Mr. al-Moody saying very openly, very candidly, very overtly, saying, we're not in America to be equal to any other religion. We're in America to be the dominant religion. Another leader of the Muslim Brotherhood said, very openly. We don't care if it takes 10 years or 100 years, America will be an Islamic nation. And I could go through and show you videos and transcripts of repeated statements by the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood about what their intentions are in America. Now, the average person of average intellect would be able to take those statements and figure out this is a serious threat to America. Well, we haven't done that as a nation. Not at the individual level, not at the church level, and certainly not at the leadership level in America. To make matters worse, in 2004 in Annandale, Virginia, a man was arrested, was taken back to his home. He and his wife were actually videoing the bridge that goes across the Potomac River there, and tried to conceal what they were doing. So they arrested him, found out they had a warrant on him, took him back to his home, went into his home and found a false basement in his home. And what they found in that false basement was essentially the archives of the entire Muslim Brotherhood. It was 2 truckloads of information. Well, one of the things that they found in that false basement was a 5-phased plan for the takeover of America. A 5-phase plan. I want you to get this book, and I want you to go and read this book. Read this plan. 5 phases. Folks, they're in phase 4 right now. This is their plan. Phase 1 is a phase of discreet and secret establishment of leadership. Phase 2, phase of gradual appearance on the public scene and exercising and utilizing various public activities. It greatly succeeded in implementing this stage. This is them writing a critique of their own success. It has also succeeded in achieving a great deal of important goals, such as infiltrating various sectors of the government, gaining religious institutions, and embracing senior scholars, gaining public sympathy and support. Sympathy and support. And then they mark this next paragraph secret, establishing, listen to this, a shadow government within the government. That's why they've infiltrated our government. Do you realize we have Muslim Brotherhood operatives inside our government now in almost every element of our government? Phase 3, the escalation phase. Prior to conflict and confrontation with the rulers through utilizing mass media. You seen anybody in the media other than maybe Glenn Beck and Sean Hannity that have come out and identified exactly what these people are doing? The rest of the media supports them. You say anything about them and the media will attack you. It's their plan. We found this in 2004. Phase 4, open public confrontation with the government through exercising the political pressure approach. The political pressure approach. It is aggressively implementing the above-mentioned approach, training on the use of weapons domestically and overseas in anticipation of 0 hour. It has no civil activities in this regard. And it goes on to phase 5, which is seizing power. That's their plan. Get the book and read it. They're in phase 4. And by the way, in Cairo and places like that, they're in phase 5. They've gone to war now. Did you hear that said? Weapons training. You know that we've got 35 compounds in America that belong to an organization called Jamaat al-Fuqra. Jamaat al-Fuqra is a terrorist organization. The head of Jamaat al-Fuqra is in Pakistan. Brags about the fact that he has 35 compounds in America that are preparing for phase 5 of their operations. You have one right down the road here, don't you, Rick?
10 miles.
10 miles from here. I live 18 miles from one, where they're doing paramilitary training. 5-phase plan. Somebody say it can't happen here, and I say to you, oh yes it can. And don't make that statement. Don't believe that, because the Europeans believed that 20 years ago. And they said the same thing can't happen here. And they made some really bad choices, made some bad decisions. And now every expert will tell you that Europe is lost, and they can't reverse it. The most popular politician in Europe today is a guy named Geert Wilders. Any of you ever seen him? Real white-haired guy. He's in the Dutch Parliament. Geert Wilders has stood up and said, we have to stop this. We made bad decisions 2 decades ago. Now we have to stop it. And his party went from being a nothing, unheard of party to being the dominant party in the Dutch Parliament. The problem is because they can't stop him any other way, and now have Geert Wilders on trial for hate crimes under the concept of a European Union hate crimes legislation. They're trying Geert Wilders, but he hasn't backed off. He's still in the fight. You now have the leaders of Germany, Britain, and France standing up saying this multiculturalism is not working. We have to stop what's happening. The problem is they can't stop it. And they can't stop it because they made some real bad decisions. And the first bad decision they made was to ignore the threat. They called evil good. With this concept of multiculturalism, they called evil good, and now they're paying a price for it. And every expert will tell you Europe is lost, and they cannot turn it around. 2008, and many of you are aware of this, and it's all detailed in this book. During a trial in Dallas, Texas, called the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terror financing trial in the history of America, they convicted all 5 defendants on 108 counts of raising money in America to support terrorism. What's interesting is the defense never refuted the evidence that was submitted. The defense never refuted it. At the end of the trial, the judge, whether he should have or not, is still debatable, but the judge issued a declaration of 246 unindicted co-conspirators, people and organizations. That means I've got the goods on you, but I don't have the resources to take you to trial. Unindicted co-conspirators. At the top of the list was an organization called the Council of American Islamic Relations, CARE. By the way, every time you see somebody speaking on behalf of the mosque at Ground Zero, where do they come from? CARE, right? CARE. Leading Islamic organization in America. CARE, realizing that because they were on that list, they were probably going to get a visit from the FBI. CARE went back to the judge and said, Judge, take us off the list. The judge said, not only will I not take you off the list, but I'm going to make the list public, and he did. And when he made that list public, CARE realized that they needed to do something about all the incriminating evidence they had at their headquarters in Northern Virginia, right outside of our capital. And they began to take all their incriminating documents and give them to a young man named, well, I won't give you his name. He was operating under a pseudonym at that time. He was a young Muslim convert, a white boy like me. You know, there's a lot of recruitment to the Nation of Islam. But this guy was allegedly a convert to Islam. He was doing a summer internship at CARE. They gave him all these documents to go destroy, and he took them out and took them to his father. They didn't know that he was actually a plant. He was not really a convert. His father was a retired Air Force colonel named David Gallus, who was a former OSI, or Office of Sensitive Investigations, colonel in the Air Force. And they, along with a guy named Paul Sperry, they wrote a book using the documents of CARE. The book is called Muslim Mafia. The day the Muslim Mafia was released, Sue Myrick from right here in Charlotte, John Shattuck, Trent Franks, and Paul Brown from Georgia stood up, had a news conference in Washington, and said, we've read this book, we're concerned about what it means, it's about the infiltration of America. We want a congressional hearing on this. And the next day they were attacked by their colleagues in the Congress. And the media raked them over the coals. And you ask the question, why? And the answer is because in that book, Muslim Mafia, there are 2 pages that show the members of Congress that are taking money from these organizations that are listed as unindicted co-conspirators. And by the way, what that essentially showed is that virtually every major Islamic organization in America is a front for the Muslim Brotherhood. Don't say it can't happen in America. We're ignoring the fact. Some people are scared. Terrorism, which is not the ultimate problem, terrorism has intimidated so many people that many people are just flat scared. They're just scared. And others are just naive. They're naive. They don't know what this is all about because they've spent no time trying to understand it. And then others are just flat supportive of what's going on. A good example of that is when Nadal Hassan, Major, U.S. Army, U.S. born, and sadly, because I'm a Hokie myself, a Virginia Tech graduate, doctor in the United States Army, walks into a reception center in Fort Hood, Texas on the 5th of November 2009 and kills 14 people. Woman was pregnant. Kills 14 people and wounds about 40 more, yelling, Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! See, that's mandatory. As they commit jihad, they have to announce their intentions. You ever watch those videos when they set off an IED? What are they doing? They're always saying, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. That's mandated in the Quran. They have to announce their intentions. Major Nadal Hassan walks in and kills and wounds people, yelling Allahu Akbar. And then a credible group of people put together a report talking about this event there and never mentioned the fact that he was a Muslim. Are we ignoring what's going on in America? Never mentioned the fact that he was a Muslim. But at the same time that this report came out, another thing came out from the Department of Homeland Security saying that future threats to America from Homeland Security, right-wing Christian groups, pro-life groups, Second Amendment groups, and returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. But Major Nadal Hassan was never identified being a Muslim. We're losing it, folks. And then we have this myth of the moderate Muslim community in America. Let me explain to you. There's three groups of Muslims in America. There are those that are Muslim in name only, and they want nothing to do with Sharia law. Then there are the jihadists on the other end of the scale who wake up every day believing that they are ordained by Allah to kill infidels, to subjugate us, to destroy our Constitution. And then there's a middle group, and they can go either way. Now, I believe in the First Amendment. I believe that those Muslims in America that just want to pray and worship Allah according to the 5 pillars of Islam, we need to let them worship. We need to support them. But all the rest that believe that it is their mandate from Allah to destroy our Constitution, we have to fight them. And we have to fight them with all we have. And that middle group can go either way. It depends on which side they see winning. If they see the jihadists winning, that's the way they're going to go. If on the other hand they see the concept of liberty winning, and they see Americans taking a stand and finding their backbone, they're going to go that way. Most of them, in reality, don't want Sharia law either. But they're also survivalists. And they'll go with the jihadists if we don't show some backbone in this country. Remember this, and Rick mentioned it. In 1917, only 3% of Russia was actually communist. And in 1924, only 3% of Germany was Nazi. But they had leadership that was willing to do whatever they had to do to bring the rest along. And that's what we need to be concerned about with this middle population in America. They'll go the way the leadership takes them if the leadership shows that they're winning. That's why a loss in Iraq or Afghanistan, I can assure you, will result in unprecedented, exponential increases in the recruiting to the jihadist cause. Because just like they did after 444 days of holding our hostages in 1979 and 1980, And just like they did when the Russians left Afghanistan and went home with their tail tucked between their legs, they will use that as propaganda to say, Allah has given us victory, come to our cause. And if you go back and check the record, you'll find out the recruiting to the Islamic cause after those two events was increased exponentially. And that's what we need to be worried about. Now let me say this, and I'm going to wrap up here in 10 minutes. But I'm very concerned today because it's not just our government, our leadership that's ignoring the threat. The church in America has actually become part of the problem. We had two pastors here about 3 or 4 weeks ago, one in Tennessee, one in Virginia, that very boldly stood up and talked about how they were showing the love of God by allowing Muslim groups to come and worship in their churches. There was a rabbi that allowed the overflow from a mosque up the street to come into their synagogue and use it for worship. You know what? That grieves me. It grieves me. When Michael Bloomberg stands up and says, we must build this mosque at ground zero, and he's got a pastor, a priest, and a rabbi standing behind him saying, yes, yes, yes. It grieves me because they know absolutely nothing about Islam. Nothing. Because what they don't understand is, when a Muslim group walks into your place of worship, to worship according to their faith, they claim that as holy ground for Allah. You think Rick Joyner would let them come in here? Oh, he'll invite them in here to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. You think he'd let them come in here and claim this place for Allah? Claim this as holy ground for Allah? And then, oh, by the way, when they come in and worship, according to their tradition and their faith and their beliefs, they curse Christianity and Judaism. They curse it when they come in to worship. They curse Jesus Christ. You think these pastors that are so proud about the fact that they're letting them use their churches and synagogues, you think they told that part of it to their congregations? They're going to come in here and curse Jesus Christ. But we'll show them love. You know something? Love has to be accompanied by truth. And there is absolutely no truth in this concept of love that they are espousing. Sadly, we've got major pastors in America today who are talking about a new concept called Chrislam. How many of you have heard this? Chrislam. Trying to say that we all worship the same God. We have a common bond between us and our religions are similar and that we're all of the Abrahamic faith. No, we're not. Don't buy the lie. Islam is not an Abrahamic religion. It is not an Abrahamic religion. And this whole idea of Chrislam, supported by big-name pastors in this country today, also grieves me that they are so ignorant or that they've compromised to the point that they now are voluntarily becoming part of the problem. This idea of an interfaith dialogue. There's a book by a man named Sam Solomon. Sam was 1 week away from being an Islamic mullah, cleric, when he came face to face with Jesus Christ and turned his life over to the living God. In 2007, 138 Islamic scholars wrote a letter to the Christian community. And here's what they said in this letter. This was after the Pope's speech at Regensburg University, where he got such a backlash from the Islamic world for the things that he said, none of which were wrong, by the way. They wrote a letter saying to the scholars there, hold on just a second, asking for an interfaith dialogue, and here's what they said. In obedience to the Holy Quran, that's the first lie in this whole thing. Because the Holy Quran says, take not the infidels for your friends. In obedience to the Holy Quran, we as Muslims invite Christians to come together with us on the basis of what is common to us. What's common between Islam and Christianity? Which is also what is most essential to our faith and the practice, the two commandments of love. They sent this out, and 300 pastors and spiritual leaders in America signed a thing called the Yale Declaration, in which they said, we welcome this interfaith dialogue to find the commonalities among our faith. The Yale Declaration. But what's incredible is some of the names on this document that signed it. Let's start with one that's in the rear of the book here, and it's called Rick Warren. Yeah. About Jim Wallace, who, by the way, anybody know where he is? He's a spiritual advisor to the president today. About Robert Schuller. You ever heard that name? Robert Schuller. What other names do we have in here? About John Ramey. About David Neff. How about David Yonggi Che? And the list goes on. 300 of them signed this document. What Sam Solomon explains in here is this is a ruse. This is all a ruse. They can't enter into an interfaith dialogue. There's no commonality. There's no commonality whatsoever between our faith and the Islamic faith. And these people who should know, should have a spirit of discernment, even if they haven't studied it, should know better. Now, you know what they did when they signed this declaration? They grieved the hearts of every Christian living in the Middle East that is just trying to survive from day to day, who are surrounded, who are being killed routinely, blown up on Christmas Day, taken out and kidnapped and beaten and slaughtered.
That's right.
And those people in places like Egypt and Pakistan and Iran and Saudi Arabia, who are crying out for the rest of the Christian community, the spiritual leadership in the Christian community, to recognize their plight and to do something to help them. It's grieving them. Not only is it doing that, it's increasing the dangers to them, because now the Muslims are showing the upper hand, because they got 300 renowned pastors to sign a declaration saying, we'll enter into an interfaith dialogue. You want to talk to them? Bring them to church to hear the gospel. Go into their communities and take the gospel to them. But this nonsense of interfaith dialogue is just that. It's nonsense. What do? We start with intercessory prayer. You may not be an intercessor. And I'm not theologically sound enough to know a whole lot about intercession, but I know that there are people who pray and there are people who intercede. One of my intercessors is back there in the back, past surgeon. And she'll call me up from the other side of the world. She called me up one time and said, as I've been interceding for you, it has been revealed to me that Satan is coming after you with a woman. Going to try to bring you down with a woman. The first person I called was my wife. The second person I called was Rick Joyner. I said, get the intercessors praying. She called me from Kuwait. If you're an intercessor, you need to start interceding for the spiritual leaders in America. Pick them by name. Pick a Rick Joyner and begin to intercede for him, that he'll continue to have the discernment and the wisdom to stand as a force of opposition against what's happening in America. You see, Sharia's already here. In 17 court cases in 11 different states, judges have openly acknowledged that they use Sharia as the basis to adjudicate that case. The worst one was up in New Jersey, when the woman went in and asked for a restraining order against her Moroccan husband who was beating her and raping her. And the judge said no restraining order because your husband was not acting with criminal intent. He was acting under Sharia law. Were you from Florida? We just had one, what, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago in Florida, where the judge down there announced that he's going to consider Sharia law in adjudicating the property settlement. 18 cases in 11 different states. We need to be praying for the leadership in our states and the leadership in our churches. We need to be interceding for them. What else can we do? There are many organizations you can get involved in. Faith to Action. We have, I guess Janet's gone, but we have Janet Porter here. Faith to Action. Get involved in Faith to Action. She gets information out on what's happening in the Islamic world, what they're trying to do in America. There's another organization called Act for America, run by a woman named Brigitte Gabriel, a Lebanese woman who lived for 7 years in a bunker because the Muslims were trying to kill her and everybody in her village. She's got a great book out called They Must Be Stopped. You can also go to Jihad Watch, a website, Jihad Watch, run by Robert Spencer. It tells you what's happening in America. We'll keep you informed on what's happening in this country. Center for Security Policy, Frank Gaffney, who published this book. There are many places that you can go to get involved in what's going on in America. Most importantly, you need to study. You need to know what's happening. There's no excuse for being uninformed on this anymore. We're beyond that. No excuse for it. You say, I didn't know. Don't use that excuse with me. There's no reason you didn't know except that you wantonly did not try to find out. You need to bombard your leaders. Listen, the evangelical community is rising up. They're going to be a real factor in this next election. And you need to let these leaders hear from you. When you see nonsense like this going on in this video I showed you, you ought to be bombarding your representative, whoever it is, your senator. You ought to be bombarding them saying, why are we as Americans having to put up with that kind of incompetence, that kind of deceit? When they come out with a report that never mentions that Nadal Hassan was a Muslim, write them, call them. Email them, go to their office when they're back in town on break, go to their websites, communicate with the leaders and let them know that we get it. Now I'm telling you, there are leaders up here in Washington now that because of people that have been hammering them, they're starting to ask the questions and we're getting an opportunity to go in and brief them. And some of them, like Louis Gohmert, are saying, I get it. And they're getting involved. But we've got to just bombard them. There's several states that are passing legislation right now. There's 19 states. Oklahoma took the lead with legislation that would prevent Sharia law from being practiced in that state. Now they're calling it American law for American courts. Get in behind that legislation. Rick Warziewak, the crazy Polak that just tries to get me killed at least once a year up here in Dearborn, Michigan. And Mark Murray and others that are working with the two of them are up there doing everything they can with the state legislature in Michigan, who has a real problem, to get legislation through that will not allow the practice of Sharia in that state. 19 states. Randy Simmons is working it in Texas. Went out to Kansas to talk to the legislators out there. Was asked to go to Missouri. Alabama's working it. Alaska's working it. Get in behind this legislation. Demand that your state representatives pass legislation that would protect us from any Sharia being practiced in your state. And hold the spiritual leaders accountable, those who say, I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to talk about this because it's offensive to some people. That's exactly what spiritual leaders are supposed to do. They're supposed to speak the truth, and the truth, if it offends, then you need to examine yourself if you're offended by the truth. Hold these spiritual leaders accountable. Go to your pastor, go to the spiritual leaders, and tell them you need to have a spirit of discernment about how dangerous this threat is, and you need to start speaking. Instead of doing nonsense like Rick Warren and John Schuler and coming up with this idea of Chrislam. Yeah, I use names in here, yes. I'm so far beyond political correctness at first. Challenge the decisions that are made. 71% of the people in America said no to the mosque at Ground Zero. Even though Michael Bloomberg stood up and proudly stated, we're going to build this mosque here. Challenge them. Don't let them get by with these decisions that they're making. Challenge them. I just mentioned some of the warriors that we got in here. There are others. There are others around the area. Get in behind them with your support. Get in behind them with your time, your financial support. We had one here the other day from the east coast of Florida, Tom Trento. Tom Trento is very courageous. He walks right into Islamic gatherings and gets right in their face and challenges them on the lies that they're propagating. He's a great warrior, a great man of God. We've got to get in this game. I told you last night as I wrapped this thing up about the Battle of Thermopylae. Battle of Thermopylae there when 300 men were confronted by an army of 250,000 from the mighty King Xerxes. And when King Xerxes looked and saw 300 men against his mighty army, King Xerxes sent a messenger up. The messenger came up and said, "The king says, lay down your weapons." The commander of the 300 was a man named Leonidas. And Leonidas said, and here's my response, Mola Lebe. Many of you know what Mola Lebe means. Come and take it. Come and take it. I'm telling you, folks. You want this? You want my Constitution? You want to destroy this? You want to take it away from me? I'm not going to lay it down. Mola Lebe. Come and take it. We'll do questions later. God bless you.